FDA, in particular, has just, with zero evidence, thrown certain companies under the bus.
And then they had a list of suggested grain-inclusive brands that are safe and effective from big pet food brands that you can trust.
Their sales did this, and the other companies went and tanked.
You only pick the dogs eating grains.
I call bull pooey. You better stop it. You're going to get labeled as a conspiracy theorist. Lisa Freeman.
Come on, Lisa. What are you doing, Lisa? Like, well, we don't like either one of you.
I'm sure that most of you by now, because of multiple outlets, including Susan Thickstead at Truth About Pet Food, have seen the post that FDA has declared that diet-related DCM does not exist.
Yeah, and
Who knew? Who said that 2.5, 3, 4 years ago? Who knew?
My favorite part about this situation is that it's all of these articles are time-stamped, including your articles saying that this whole thing is a dumb scam. They all have dates on them, right? So we know for the past 4 years, Judy has been saying that there is not any evidence suggesting
bull pooey.
A link between dilated cardiomyopathy and grain-free diets. So for those of you that just maybe heard from your veterinarian or your local veterinary receptionist that your dog needs to eat grains, why don't we go back to the beginning of how this huge mess freaking started?
Yeah, so let's go back to the very beginning. So I have what was on the FDA site. This is actually their update in 2019. It says, in July 2018, the FDA announced, and boy, they did it publicly, and it was pushed by everyone, that it had begun investigating reports of canine dilated cardiomyopathy in dogs eating certain pet foods, many labeled as grain-free. And then our dear friend Lisa Freeman came up with, we're going to call them bag diets, boutique exotic grain-free diets, which contained a high proportion of peas, lentils, other legume seeds or pulses, and or potatoes in various forms, whole flour, protein, etc., as main ingredients, which means listed within the first 10 ingredients in the ingredient list before vitamins and minerals. Because when you get to salt, it's 0.5% or less. So anything below that, that's just another rant. So when you see the blueberries and the cranberries and all those antioxidants and they're listed after salt, forget it. There's one blueberry in that 50-pound bag.
You get one blueberry per bag.
Many of these case reports, this is still the FDA, many of these case reports included breeds of dogs not previously known to have a genetic predisposition to the disease, but they also included dogs who do have a genetic predisposition to the disease. So the FDA's Center for Veterinary Medicine and Veterinary Laboratory Investigation and Response Network, VetLearn, a collaboration of government and veterinary diagnostic laboratories under their thumbs, continue to investigate this potential association. Based on the data collected and analyzed thus far, the agency believes the potential association between diet, DCM, and dogs is a complex scientific issue that may involve multiple factors. But a year earlier, now it may involve complex factors. A year earlier, it was, we're calling out these 15 pet food companies. Let us list them in order. These are 560 dogs that were diagnosed with DCM, and this is what they were eating. Oh my gosh, they were grain-free diets. Well, you know what? If every dog eating a grain-free diet developed DCM, I don't know, there'd be like 300 million dogs with DCM around the world.
So immediately when this news came out, you were like, this doesn't, from a nutrition perspective, this doesn't make any sense. So you immediately were like, red flag. All pet parents heard was their veterinarian or somebody at their veterinary office telling them, you have to feed grains or your dog's going to get dilated cardiomyopathy and die. So I think the important part is to analyze where this information started and where it came from, because that is a big piece of this story. So Dr. Lisa Freeman was the veterinarian.
She was one of them. There was another in California. There were a couple cardiologists in California, and then her.
She was the lead researcher on this project. And so it's come out now that the big glaring oopsie daisies, which was probably done on purpose, is probably? that was done on purpose, is they cherry picked the dogs that were part of this so-called study to focus on these specific BEG bag diets, the boutique exotic grain-free diets. Right. So they were she and team, whoever was involved in this besides her, they were not using an unbiased sample of dogs.
So cardiologists were told only to report to FDA dogs with DCM that were eating grain-free diets. When you skew the data and you say, we only want you to report to FDA cases of DCM that are pets that are eating, and it wasn't just dogs, there were some cats included in this too.
Yeah, there were, I see there's a few feline reports.
But they only wanted cases that were eating bag diets. Well, that's not a double blind study. That's not comparing anything. So we could have just as easily said, hey, we only want you to report dogs with DCM that are eating grains. Well, we'd have a totally different study then, wouldn't we?
Right, and then your conclusion would probably say, oh, look at all these dogs eating grains that had dilated cardiomyopathy. Maybe grains cause dilated cardiomyopathy. It's like, well, you only picked the dogs eating grains. So
this is not a study. So, and then when we look a little bit further, the cardiologists, so it's not just one,
right, this is an industry-wide,
who originally started this whole thing, are funded, and it says it right on their websites. They're funded by Nestle Purina, by Mars, by Hills. Okay, let me just tell you, and this is worldwide, human-wide, veterinary-wide, any study can be skewed any way you want it to. So, on December 23rd, darling FDA,
of 2022. So that's even the year before was from 2018. They updated it in 2019. So
here we are 3 years later. 3 years. December 23rd. So this was not a press release. This was not posted. This was not sent out. This was just a quiet little addendum on the original article.
So you had to go to the FDA website and look up DCM and grain-free diets and find this specific page within the FDA website to see this tiny little note at the top that they added.
That says, FDA does not intend to release further public updates until there is meaningful new scientific information to share. A count of reports of DCM in dogs submitted to FDA as of November 1st, 2022 has been added. FDA has followed up on a subset of these reports, but is unable to investigate every report to verify or confirm the reported information. While adverse event numbers can be a potential signal of an issue with an FDA-regulated product, by themselves, they do not supply sufficient data to establish a causal relationship with reported products. But that didn't stop them from throwing all those companies under the bus. FDA continues to encourage research and collaboration, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, where was the research before? This was the first time ever that FDA, in particular, has just, with zero evidence, thrown certain companies under the bus.
Yeah, so there was actually this list that came out of brands you should not feed because they could possibly cause dilated cardiomyopathy. Again, with no evidence.
Right, 500 dogs.
And then they
out of a population of like 160 million in this country.
And then they had a list of suggested grain-inclusive brands that are safe and effective from big pet food brands that you can trust. And what happened to the market? Those big pet food brands that have grains in them made a bazillion dollars off of this scandal.
It literally,
and it tanked these small companies that were.
If you go and look at sales of different pet food products starting in 2018 when this debacle came out, you will see that the big 3 to 5 pet food companies selling that suddenly were having their grain inclusive products being pushed by every veterinarian, every cardiologist. Their sales did this. I looked them up. I should have printed it out, but I looked them up. Their sales did this, and the other companies went and tanked. So let's talk Champion Pet Foods, because their sales went down of Origin and Akana because they were on the list. Their sales went down by 30% within a 6-month period. 30%. What company can sustain? I mean, they did sustain because they're a huge company. 30% loss. They laid off half of their workforce. People lost their jobs over this.
And the FDA just added a quiet little note that's like, oops.
Oopsie, sorry.
There actually is not enough evidence to say that these two things are linked.
Yeah, because maybe we should have taken out all the dogs in that list, that 560 dogs or whatever it was. Maybe we should have taken out the Dobermans, the Great Danes, the Irish Wolfhounds, the Cocker Spaniels. You know, those breeds who are genetically predisposed. Might have wanted to take them out. On the kitty cat side, might have wanted to take out the Maine Coons and the Ragdolls and the cat breeds that are prone to heart issues. But no, we didn't do that. We just threw them under the bus. So, Gwen, let's talk about your interesting comment that you made that made me sit you in that chair.
Yeah, so I think the timeline of these events is very fishy. The fact that we had 4 years ago, these big pet food companies were using their pull over the FDA to specifically bash these list of pet foods, two of which, of the two probably the most popular brands that were thrown under the bus were Akana and Origin. Those weren't ones that we were recommending anyway, but they generally were pretty popular in the natural pet care space. So what happens? Champion Pet Foods tanks by 30%. Their company valuation tanks. Their market price tanks. They're struggling. They're laying off all their people in business. And now what was just announced last year at the end of the year? Oh, that Mars Pet Care, a multi-billion-dollar company, is now purchasing Champion Pet Foods after they have tanked from this mysterious announcement with zero evidence about how their foods are causing DCM. And
how much
now,
you know, I bet all of a sudden it's going to be pushing grain-free
and
decrease
now,
allergies.
Now that Mars Pet Care has announced that they are acquiring grain-free brands, suddenly, December 23rd of 2022, we have an addendum by the FDA saying they can't find a link between grain-free pet foods and DCM after Mars Pet Care is scheduled to acquire two of the largest grain-free brands that there are on the market right now. I think that's a little fishy. And I think that's a very smart business plan on Mars' part to use their pull. But heck.
Do you think they really planned it 4 years ago to go let...
I think maybe they knew it was going to tank the other market. Whether
you better stop it. You're going to get labeled as a conspiracy theorist.
I probably. Probably. But man, this is like that. But I mean, for people, it's scary too, because the FDA, that they regulate things for people, is not just about pet foods.
We're not going to go there because I'll get kicked off of every social media platform for the rest of my life.
We can't go there. But the point is, this illustrates how you can literally buy these regulatory bodies. It's not about pets. It's not about people. It's not about health. It's about money. It's about who is buying what.
Yep.
And that, to me, like, this was just, we knew that this was going on, but to see the FDA just quietly put a statement that says, by the way, we ruined millions of lives and caused a $1 million scandal, but we'll add this one little sentence. Are you serious?
And all the independent pet store owners who have spent literally decades convincing people to feed their pets a better diet, feed raw diets, which, by the way, by being a raw diet, it doesn't have grains and peas and legumes and a bunch of potatoes in it. I mean, that's not how you make a raw diet. So they're considered grain-free. They're considered beg. So hundreds of thousands of pet owners have gone into pet stores and said, I'm bringing back this beautiful, wonderful, gently cooked or raw food that you convinced me to put my dog on, and he's doing so well. And now I want to trade this in. Can I have some Pro Plan or some Eukanuba or some IAMS or some Royal Canin to replace it? Because that has grains. Ugh. I get emails every day. I did a consultation last week for a Doberman with dilated cardiomyopathy. By the way, genetically prone to it, a breed prone to it, was a beautiful raw-fed dog. The cardiologist told them their dog would die if they did not immediately put the dog on a grain-inclusive dry kibble. Being wonderful pet parents, they said, oh my gosh, let us run out and get some. And within 2 weeks, the dog's coat is going to heck. It's dry. It has no energy. Its poop is terrible. The dog looks like poo. And they said, can we please go back to the raw diet? I said, will you please go back to the raw diet? Feed your dog what it needs to support heart health, not the crap that is not agreeing with your dog. So when Gwen or Emily, somebody posted a graphic earlier today about this. And so someone jumped in and said, well, what about this study that proves, blah, blah, blah.
Proves that Dr. Lisa Freeman is a very busy gal selling her soul.
Let's look at who is one of the authors. That would be Lisa Freeman.
Come on, Lisa! What are you doing, Lisa?
So, comparison of echocardiographic measurements and cardiac biomarkers in healthy dogs eating non-traditional or traditional diets. Now, this was done at Oregon State University at their veterinary college, but somehow, even though she works at Tufts, she's part of this study. Starts out with, there's been a recent association between non-traditional diets and development of DCM in dogs. Well, no, there really hasn't. Really hasn't.
It was actually just you made that statement and
so
went viral for God knows what reason.
Advertising. So they took 46 healthy dogs that belonged to staff and clients and compared blood markers and echocardiographic measurements, and they purposely excluded breeds that are known genetically to be prone to DCM. They didn't have a bunch of mixed breed dogs in there, so unless they did some DNA testing, we don't know. Could those dogs have been carrying genetic markers for DCM? Don't know. They didn't go with that. But there's a couple problems with this little study that they did. One, in their non-traditional food group, so there's 23 dogs in each group, the non-traditional dog group, 3/4 of them were males. The traditionally fed group, which means grain inclusive, 3/4 of them were females. Well, males are more prone to DCM than females are. So we've already got a skew in the study right there. Secondly, they measured a whole bunch of stuff. And so they measured ejection fraction. They measured size of all the different heart chambers. They measured proBNP, which is a blood test to look for beginnings of heart disease. They did cardiac troponin 1. They did whole blood and plasma taurine levels. Well, guess what? Taurine levels, no problems across the board, both in blood and plasma. Cardiac troponin 1, normal in every dog in the study. proBNP, normal in every dog in the study. Ejection fraction was lower for dogs eating non-traditional diets, but it was still within the normal values. And there was one other thing. The left ventricular end systolic volume was higher in dogs eating non-traditional diets, but still within the normal parameters. And from that, they conclude dogs eating non-traditional diets are going to get DCM.
Yeah, and
let's how many normal parameters were there in there? And everything fell within the normal range.
And just statistically, right, they're claiming that we're having such a high incidence of issues and we're not seeing a proportional rate of increase in the incidence of DCM consistently with the increase of the use of these diets. So from start to finish, there were a lot of red flags and holes in this whole thing, which is why we have been saying we don't believe it from the start. And it doesn't make any sense because dogs do not eat grains in their diet. Neither do cats. So for all of you that have been adding like a tablespoon of grains to your dog's diet because you think that's going to keep them healthy, not necessarily. Your heart is in the right place, but that's not necessary for your pet.
So here's the problem, though. The veterinary community and cardiologists in particular have latched onto this like white on rice. They are not letting go. They are going to preach this to you till the sun goes down for the last time. They are not going to let this go. And, it's a travesty because we are taking our animals from impeccable health on species-appropriate diets, and we're feeding them what is not appropriate for them and causing inflammation, joint disease, dental disease. Like, the list just goes on and on and on. And so we're going back to recommending foods that have enough preservatives in them to keep them shelf stable for 25 years. And the companies will proudly tell you this is shelf stable for 25 years. I am not feeding that to my pets. So
yeah, it's so gross. Not even mold wants it. Jeez, my bad.
So I would recommend going to the FDA website and putting in the DCM thing and find this little statement, the December 23rd statement. We printed out real big, and take that to your veterinarian the next time they say, "Oh no, you have to include grains." Go, yeah, there's no studies that support that because FDA says there's no studies that support that. We got none. Now, does this mean that I am recommending that you all run out and buy grain-free kibble and everybody goes back to feeding a high pea and lentil dry food? No, that's horrible. I wouldn't feed that to my pets.
So, and I think that is another part of this story. So behind the scenes, right? So not only do we have these big pet food companies basically buying the FDA, and just the FDA will say what they want them to say, which is absolutely
shocking.
But beyond this, we have these lobbyist groups that are actually fighting over the pet food industry behind the scenes. So there are actual lobbyists for the legume industry, and there are lobbyists for the grain industry, and their whole job is basically to sell as many legumes and as many grains as possible and put them in pet food. Why? Well, you can get rid of a lot of not human grade materials that way.
Rendered ingredients and waste oils. I mean, this is the fun of going to FDA or AFCO meetings, which I'm missing this week. When you go to AFCO meetings and they go around the room and everybody says where they're from, and you're like, why would the waste oil industry be present at a pet food meeting? Oh, they're trying to dump their waste oils. Oh, why is the Rendering Association represented in huge numbers here? They're trying to dump their stuff. And there's all these people from all these different industries trying to get their waste products approved as pet food ingredients.
And the way that they have been doing it recently in pet food are research studies, because they found out that pet parents, if they see something that looks fancy and scientific, they'll believe it, which we don't blame you for because you're not the scientists, you're not the veterinarians here. However, the problem is that you have these big money groups that are basically just putting out these research studies, and they're cherry picking either the sample data sets or whatever to make it prove, oh, hey, grains are great for your dog. You should buy lots of grains. Here's bazillions of dollars to the grain industry. Or the legume industry, who felt a big hit through this whole grain-free debacle. And the legume industry has been trying to prove that dogs don't need grains because they want dogs to eat legumes. Like, well, we don't like either one of you.
I don't want either in my dog's food or my cat's food.
How about we uninvite the grain lobbyists and the legume lobbyists from the pet food industry, because we don't want either of you.
And how about all the waste industries?
Frick.
So anyway, there's your first rant of the year. I had to invite Gwen in.
Yeah.
See? The apple didn't fall that far from the tree. She says she gets all anxious when I go on rants. She jumped right in there.
We did have some new people say when we posted this that were very confused because they thought that dogs needed grains. So just to debunk that.
So the moral of the story is no, your dogs and cats do not need to eat grains. Just grains or all starches.
Well,
we don't recommend any starches.
Yeah.
Although I have become a bit of a fan of sweet potatoes for certain cases.
I have too. The sweet potato has some redeeming qualities.
Butternut squash, I'm a big fan of.
The
pumpkin. So those kinds of things.
Sometimes carrots.
But that's not what this whole debacle was about. So the thing is, first they were saying, oh, this has to do with not enough taurine in the food, or taurine not being absorbed, even though most of the dogs had normal taurine levels. So how does that play in? Because even this study that I was just referencing, the latest one that was at Oregon, they all had normal taurine levels, even the ones who were on non-traditional diets. So it's not that. But from grains, this is not true for cats. Cats must have taurine in their diet. So if you read a bag or a can of cat food, you'll probably see taurine as an added ingredient, particularly if there's a lot of grains and not enough meat in the diet, because cats are meatosauruses and they need meat to survive. So they can't make taurine. It has to be supplied in their diet, and taurine is found in meat. So for cats, they've known for decades that they had to add taurine to the food. For dogs, they can make taurine out of cysteine and methionine, which are found in grains. So when they eat the grains, their body does this little metabolism thing and poof, spits out taurine that their body can then use for cardiac function. So,
I mean, I think
that's where it came from.
But there are also, so we've been fighting over like grains and legumes and whatever. The point that I think most people are missing, especially veterinarians when they're talking about nutrition, is that those things should be, if they're in the dog's diet at all, which we don't usually recommend, but if they are, it should be a very, very, very small percentage. The problem is they're trying to save money.
They're trying to justify the use of
cheaper. They're trying to use cheaper ingredients. Meat, human grade meat, is extremely expensive, and so they're replacing things in the diet like meat and organs, which our dogs and cats both need, with these other ingredients. So, like, if I was feeding. Like, a great example was Marlowe. After his surgery, I wanted to quickly put some weight on him. He's eating a grain-free diet. It's all provided. It's like 90%
grain-free, as in raw.
Right.
It's a raw diet, so of course it's
meat, organs, bones, vegetables, low carbohydrate vegetables, some additional ingredients. But I actually added a carbohydrate to his low carb diet to help him gain weight. So there are cases where we do recommend, like, hey, a brown rice or a sweet potato or whatever might have benefits. And in TCVM, they have different energetics and properties. And I know some good like chi tonics that you use sometimes. There are some grains, but the problem is when those things are replacing the meat and the bulk of where our dogs and cats need to get their nutrients from. So if you're just adding a tablespoon of brown rice to your dog's wonderfully high meat, high moisture diet, it's not, I wouldn't say that they're particularly doing anything
harmful
like that, because it's a small portion of the diet. So I don't think we need to necessarily villainize grains or legumes completely. It's more about how they are used.
The problem is peas and lentils have high protein. Oats are high protein. So corn is fairly high protein. So when you add a bunch of that in and you're trying to, so let's say you're making a dry kibble and you want that kibble to be 28 or 30% or 32% protein. How do you cheaply get your protein level up without having to spend a lot of money on meat? Well, you throw a bunch of peas in the bag, or you throw a bunch of oats in the bag, or brown rice, or something. You get your protein source from somewhere else. Like, I love the way labeling of pet food is done in Europe, because in Europe, when it lists the ingredients, it actually has to put the percentage of that ingredient. So it'll say, if the first ingredient's in chicken, it might say 22%. And then the next ingredient is peas, it'll say it's 10% or whatever. Whereas in this country, it's anybody's guess. They're in descending order.
And they also do like they spread out the ingredients.
Do ingredient splitting. So you might have pea protein, pea starch, pea fiber, pea protein meal. So you can have peas 5 different ways in there, which adds up to an awful lot of peas, but they're listed lower on the ingredient list. So you're thinking, there's not that many peas in there. They're pretty low on the list, except that you got to multiply it by 5. And then the other thing that is done is if the first ingredient is, for instance, whole chicken, remember that's 75% moisture. And so the water weight brings it up to the top of the list. It doesn't mean that there's more chicken protein in there than there is pea protein in there. It's just that it gets to be first on the list because we've got the water weight.
And this is like reason number 75 why, unfortunately, the pet food industry, though it is regulated, it's not regulated well at all. And they can't with some of these smaller brands very effectively. So it really is about trust. You have to feed a brand that you trust. Am I going to trust one of these big pet food companies that was responsible for all of this debauchery just over money? Absolutely not. You have proven that you don't care about my pet. I'm not that I was going to feed that anyway, but I'm solidified in my rebellion against them. Big pet food strikes again.
All right. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.